Let's talk about the big stories. If you are just waking up this morning, let me just show you the front page of The Times, our sister publication this morning. Labour's tax plans trigger an exodus of millionaires. A record number of millionaires have left Britain since Keir Starmer came to power. There is growing concern that Labour's tax plans are exiling international investors and damaging the economy. Loads of calls from people saying, hang on a minute, you need to reverse this crackdown on the non-dom residents because the exodus is absolutely enormous. We lost 10,800 millionaires to migration last year. That's up 157%. The whole point about this, and it is ideology over everything, is that Labour says, oh, well, obviously we need to redistribute wealth and all the rest of it. What they don't seem to understand is that if you've got high net worth individuals, they also employ people in this country. So it's everything from people who work in factories or in their businesses or whatever, but it goes down to people like who look after their kids or clean their homes.
Yeah. You know, this is particularly personal to me as a councillor who represents an area with high net worth individuals. So, a little stat for you, in Elmbridge, 10 years ago...
Just tell us where Elmbridge is.
So Elmbridge is in Surrey, so southwest London, so towns like Esher, Weybridge, Walton-on-Thames.
It's a very nice part of the world.
Yeah, thank you, it is. But the 130,000 residents of Elmbridge 10 years ago paid double the amount of income tax of Newcastle and Cardiff combined.
Wow.
Yeah, oh yeah. So you've got to think, so that's only 130,000 people that have... And also, bearing in mind, we're a community that not only give the most, but we take the least. Most of us just rely on private education and private healthcare, so we're not taking up spaces in the NHS and private and state schools. So technically, we are kind of the star, kind of, this is what you should be doing, and they're scaring them off. So not only are we paying the most, we're taking the least. I should say we are.
Well, what I would... So I would counter that by saying, yes, of course, people who are in that position have worked hard, and obviously they deserve the fruits of their labours, but at the same time, you're right. So they're paying to look after themselves. At the same time, they're contributing to the coffers of the nation, looking after those people who are less well off. I would also say that I think in this country there is I think that the morality of the country is that we should provide for those people who are less well off.
Do you know, I agree with that, and I always take the mentality of, if you're very well off, right, I personally think it's your duty to use private services, right?
Do you?
Yes, I think when you saw Keir Starmer, who's a multimillionaire, going, oh, I wouldn't use private healthcare, whatever, I think you're part of the problem, because I actually think it's on someone like you to use private healthcare, and so the NHS is freed up for those who need it.
Okay, question for you. Would you make private healthcare tax deductible?
Yes. I would encourage it as much as I can, and I would, you know, I'd really just kind of go for it. And same with education. I think we should be encouraging people to use it. It's interesting that they keep talking about private healthcare, though, don't they? Wes Streeting and Keir Starmer, and they changed their wording. They keep saying stuff like, we're going to kind of take it on and all this sort of, because they're very careful with their wording, because they don't want people to say, oh, you're privatising NHS, when it's kind of been a hybrid.
Well, going back to the private school things, they say, well, what they're going to do in terms of changing the tax regime is that by adding VAT, they'll then make sure that 1.5 billion comes back into the Treasury. What they don't seem to understand is the current system saves them 4.5 billion. So again, I just wonder, has anyone in the Treasury actually looked at the numbers?
Well, it sounds good, though, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? To those people who, I guess, the politics of envy, those who vote like that, you're going to think, yeah, well, it's not fair, is it, that they're getting that better education, so we're going to take money from them and we're going to give it to your kids. That's the sell. But really, the reality is, OK, well, we've now seen schools close because of it. So now, someone's class size has gone from 20 pupils to 35 or whatever.
And I've spoken about this before. I think the most iniquitous thing about all of this, it's happened in the middle of a school year, and I've spoken to parents who are devastated.
No time to plan.
No time to plan, but not only that, for the children themselves to be yanked out of those schools halfway through the year, where they haven't got schools to go to, they leave their friends. I mean, that's just cruel.
The ones it hurts the most are those of special educational needs. Yes. There's one near me, a school called Walton Lees School, which I work with, and I actually secured £60,000 for them a couple of years ago to develop outside. But they are full, and the reason why those schools are particularly, you know, hard hitting is because they've got about 80 pupils but about 60 staff. So it's nearly one for one because of the job that they provide. But it means they can't take any more students on. Now those that are fee-paying, people obviously going, I can't afford it anymore. But the schools are going, but we can't take you. So what the government have said is, oh, right, we'll give you a bit of money so you can do private tutoring and stuff like that. You think, oh my God, who's thought this through?
No one.
So, yeah, it's a disaster.
And just in terms of the Treasury, they say that ending the non-dom regime will raise £2.5 billion a year for the next 5 years. But when you talk to people like Oxford Economics, they say, actually, it's going to cost the Exchequer £1 billion more. They're not going to make that saving because so many non-doms will leave, and that is even before the impact of VAT and all the rest of it. So again, just in terms of this, and I think this is a very good quote from David Hawkins for Foreign Investors for Britain. He represents non-doms. He says this is a monumental act of national self-harm. Just add it to the list of other monumental acts of self-harm that this government is imposing.
It'd be interesting to see the average net worth of the person who's left, to calculate how many average salaries you'd need to replace one person leaving. That'd be quite fascinating, I think.
Well, and just in terms of that, I don't have that number, but the numbers I do have, by 2035, the non-dom reforms will make the economy £1.3 billion smaller than it would have been. It will lead to 23,000 job losses by 2030. Lots of people have been very vociferous about this. People like Charlie Mullings, who I know very well. Obviously, he founded Pimlico Plumbing. He says Britain is in trouble. I won't blame Labour completely, and I agree with this. The Tories also lost the plot, your former party, but Labour has made it worse. They've raised taxes, they've added new employment laws, like getting a contract on day one. At the end of the day, we have to incentivise entrepreneurs to be entrepreneurial, to start businesses, to then say, right, we need to get people into these companies. Simon Wolfson, who I also know, who's the chief executive of Next, has said, basically, the reforms that will happen under Labour means that young people will not be employed by companies like his.
There is a massive opportunity here. The amount of capitalists the amount of people who have set up their own business per 100,000 in this country is actually higher than those in the US, which is a surprising fact, which means that by default, British people are quite entrepreneurial.
Yeah,
and
very
yet,
much so.
And yet there are so many barriers. But I think the biggest barrier is culture. We're creating a culture, I think, enhanced by the Labour Party, where it's almost like, don't do it kind of thing, be an employee. I think very much that's come top down. I think, yeah, I personally think there is a massive opportunity here. Tying ourselves to the Americans could help with that rather than the EU, but they're stifling it.
So, obviously, you've switched parties. For people who don't know, you were a Conservative councillor, you're now a Reform councillor. In terms of the economics and what Reform wants to do, what would you like to see in terms of incentivising people, making sure that entrepreneurs do prosper?
The biggest one that they can do is corporation tax. Now, corporation tax... even though when you hear Rishi Sunak, actually, obviously they increased it under there, and he kind of tried to put a spin in it by saying, yes, but if we do these type of reforms and this, we actually... But it's a headline tax, corporation tax. So I think it was critical, and I've been saying it since the Jeremy Hunt kind of Boris Johnson elections, when I voted for Hunt because he promised to cut corp tax down to 12. That is the biggest kind of headline tax for any major company that's looking to invest in this country. So I think that's the biggest thing. And I genuinely do think Reform are on the side of that. And the Conservatives have plenty of time to do this. Now, in fairness to the Conservatives, they left the economy in a state that I think has been downplayed by Labour, and I think a bit unfairly, because as you see now, they've revised all the growth figures to much lower than what it would have been under the Conservatives.
But you see, if they'd been... Actually, if they'd kept their nerve and stayed with Liz Truss, and I think she was right, where she said we need to cut corporation tax, that is the point of Brexit, to actually devolve ourselves from Europe, to do things that are in the national interest of the United Kingdom. And actually, if we'd done that, then what happens is, if the companies pay less in corporation tax, they employ more people. We've got masses of people who are unemployment, not in education, employment or training, and those people need to be incentivised to get back into work.
Yeah, Liz Truss was right and wrong. I think in principle she was right, but the way she went about it was wrong. She didn't take the
markets with her.
No, she did, and the forecast when people wanted to know, okay, well, what is the current state of the economy? And if we're unable to provide that, people think, oh, is it worse than it is? Is it, and all of a sudden that uncertainty creates shaky foundations. So
let's move on and talk about the United States, shall we? Because of course Donald Trump comes into power on Monday, not long to go now. How do you view that?
I think it's great news for this country, right? anybody who is kind of, I know the Liberal Democrats are keen, you know, I mean, they're probably the most anti-Trump at the moment because Labour realise now they can't take that role because they actually have to work with him. But I honestly don't get this obsession around the Democrats. What did we get from Joe Biden in these last 4 years? That
Absolutely
made us go,
nothing.
yes. In fact, all we got was him with selfies with Jerry Adams.
Well, it's interesting. We'll talk about this after the break, but this is the front page of the Daily Telegraph this morning. Trump to rule on Starmer's Chagos deal. This has been pulled now, and quite right, in my humble opinion. Donald Trump. And, of course, the Labour Party is sort of dancing around this, saying, oh, no, we've done it deliberately because of Donald Trump, and we need to have his sign-off on this. And just to hear kind of the vernacular is changing so dramatically, essentially saying, oh, we're cozying up to Trump. Well, I think this is the right thing to do diplomatically. Trump loves the United Kingdom, and if the government plays its cards right, it can use this to the advantage of the United Kingdom.
I agree. I'm not really sure who this deal pleases, right? I think it maybe makes David Lammy feel a bit better about
the original
himself.
deal? Are you
well,
talking about?
the deal, yeah, that the government brokered. And now I actually think it highlights Nigel Farage's power in the sense that he's obviously been in Trump's ear. Would Trump know about this? Potentially, but would he know the severity of it? Probably not.
And certainly Nigel Farage has spoken to Trump about
and
this.
he probably will be over the coming days. So I think it will be a massive win for him, and just to kind of show and wield how much power he has. It's not just 5 MPs. It's
so just let me ask you this, and I'll ask everyone at home as well. Trump's inauguration on Monday. Very sadly, neither of us have an invite, and we're
I have.
Oh, have you? No, you haven't. All right. But neither of us are going. Is it a day of celebration or a day of mourning?
I think it's a day of celebration and opportunity and great things to come. Yeah, I think it's a good thing.
Very good, Harrison. Thank you very much.